With me today is Noell Jett. Noell is a very popular influencer and author, sharing with people across the world all about her life and raising five kids. But what a lot of people don't know about Noell is that she grew up in the Shiny Happy People cult. So Noell, I can't wait to hear about your experience. What was life like for you growing up in the Shiny Happy People cult, IBLP?
All I ever knew was the Shiny Happy People cult. My parents got involved in it when I was, I believe, 3 years old. So from the time I was able to remember anything, that's all I knew. So, following the rules and regulations, everything being judged on my outward appearance and my performance based activities, what I wore, all of that was completely influenced by IBLP for my entire life.
Hmm. And you were in that cult. You were in IBLP until how old? How old were you when you
So
left?
I was 20 years old when my dad actually ended up being the assistant pastor at the church we were at.
Okay.
And they, for all intents and purposes, got excommunicated when I was 20. And it was a very harsh reality that this group that had been our family, our friends, everything that we knew, because my parents truly fell into this hook, line, and sinker. Like they
Hmm.
devoted their entire beings to what this church was teaching and to what IBLP was passing down.
Hmm.
And so to just be kicked to the curb and, you know, turn their backs on us was very hard for my entire family.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that when you grow up in the IBLP environment, it is a life of isolation, and you don't have a whole lot of friends outside of the cult, unless your
None.
parents are very liberal by
Yes.
IBLP standards, right? And so if you are separated from that cult family, all of a sudden you're just completely on your own. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very
And
few
at that
friends,
point
very little family.
I have four brothers. At that point I still had three younger ones at home. I think the two youngest were still in school. And so they were made to homeschool because they weren't allowed to go to the school anymore
Right.
and ripped away from any semblance of friends they had. I was already off of college, so I think it was a little different for me, but it was
Okay.
very, very hard on my youngest two brothers.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Just that culture shock that they
Mm-hmm.
experience immediately. As far as your experience, just kind of observing within IBLP, what did you see that you would characterize as problematic or maybe dangerous within the IBLP cult?
The culture that it created,
Mm,
the culture not only from Gothard, but what infiltrated into the churches and the families underneath them that created this culture of secrecy, of women and children. I think honestly, women and children is who it affected the worst
mhm.
because we were the ones that were controlled and manipulated and made to feel shame over every action that you did. The men, which my parents were actually very strict on my brothers, considering like they weren't allowed to wear shorts either. They were, had to have shirts on all the time.
Mm.
We weren't allowed to do mixed swimming. If we did, we had on jeans and t-shirts. The boys had on jeans and t-shirts. I had on culottes and t-shirts. So my brothers, I think they experienced it even more than some other guys that grew
Yeah.
up in a similar situation.
Mhm.
Um, but it was just so hard as a woman and as a girl because you're just taught one thing: you're going to grow up, you're going to become a pastor's wife, and you're going to keep a smile on your face, and you're going to keep your mouth shut,
Right.
no matter what.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've talked about this on the podcast so much, is that this cult was especially dangerous for women,
Yeah.
definitely children as well, just because of some of the punishment tactics they use. My God. But for women, this thing was just so damaging. The brainwashing was rampant,
Oh,
just among the
yes.
female population. I mean, absolutely crazy. I think it took a lot longer for a lot of women who got out of the cult to really disentangle from a lot of that ideology. And I think
Like
it's
I've told you, my mom still struggles to this day, and it's been 20 years.
now you said you were in college at 20. How did you manage to get to college
Bible
after growing up
college.
in IBLP?
Bible college. So I
Oh,
went
okay.
to one college my freshman year that was right there in Springfield, Missouri. And then my parents deemed that too liberal
Sure.
for us, even though I, still didn't wear pants and I still, still all the rules applied. So I went to another one in Oklahoma City and it was even more strict. So you weren't, definitely no pants there, no dating, no, all the same rules that, I'd grown up with.
Wow.
So you basically were going to find a pastor to marry, or a missionary to marry. You
Yeah.
weren't going to get a career.
That's crazy though. I didn't realize. I mean, I knew that IBLP had its own school, Verity College, right? Which isn't really a college. It's more so like a distance
Well,
learning program.
neither are the ones I went to.
Okay. Okay.
No.
I didn't realize outside of Verity that there were other campuses like this.
So I don't know that, like I said, IBLP infiltrated a lot of other denominations, a
Mhm.
lot of other churches. So just because it followed the principles and followed the booklets and followed all of his teachings, they revered Gothard and they thought he was great, but they didn't necessarily follow into his, exact pattern.
Right.
And honestly, I've kind of, why did these people hold such a stance that they weren't going to just, full on Gothard? And honestly, I think it was narcissism. I think they wanted to be the leader. They
Right.
wanted the worship. They, the I won't say any names, but there's certain leaders in the community that they wanted to be the Gothard. They wanted
Yeah.
everyone looking at them with that same awe and respect that Gothard was able to command. And so
Absolutely.
they had their own colleges and their own things going on.
Oh yeah. And here in Texas, we've experienced our fair share of that.
Oh
There's all
yeah.
kinds of little mini Gothards out there. One of the previous episodes we talked about Doug Phillips and the Vision Forum movement, right in Bernie, Texas, which is just an hour away from where I live. And so we've definitely seen a lot of that. And you're right. I think there was a fair amount of jealousy within, these fundamental religious leadership organizations.
Yep.
Right.
I grew up in Missouri, so I was right there in the Midwest with you.
Oh yeah. Right there
Oh,
in the Bible Belt. Love it.
Oh yeah.
Now, when did you start realizing how, potentially harmful or dangerous IBLP was?
Honestly, for a good decade after we left, I just reeled. Like I just didn't even know what I believed. Like I feel like my entire moral compass was just like flipped,
Yeah.
And like, okay, if wearing pants isn't a sin, if going to the movies isn't a sin in and of itself,
Right.
if playing cards isn't a sin, if dancing a little bit isn't a sin, then what is a sin? Like, what do I believe? What's right? What's wrong? Like things that most people may battle when they're teenagers or, work out as they grow up. I'm in my 20s going, crap. I don't know. I don't know what I believe here. And I've never been allowed to have the independence to go out and figure these things out for myself.
Right.
So I nosedived big time. And it wasn't until I found myself on the other side of that decade almost that I went back and saw, for myself through a new set of eyes, and a set of eyes 10 years removed from this 20 years of indoctrination. And I was able to look back and see, wow, that's problematic. There's some serious issues here. And then just to hear the people in those circles still excuse it and still just kind of give it permission, it just kind of blew my mind. Like, how can you still look back at that and just be like, that's just how it was back then. That's just how we did things. Like, it was wrong. There's molestation in the church and you just ship them off to another church. Like, that was commonplace behavior. I know when I was writing my book, my editor, I had a chapter in there talking about this abuse and moving them to different churches. And she's like, well, that's not that common. Like, I don't think you should talk about that in there. I don't think that's something most people would relate to. And I'm like, you have no idea.
It is rampant because these ideologies, and we talked about this a little bit, Noelle. It's not just the leaders, right? It's the principles that those leaders teach. And those principles can carry from one leader right onto the next one, right?
Absolutely.
And so it creates this environment for predatory behavior and abuse.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's so incredibly dangerous and insidious about these types of ideologies.
Absolutely. When you have the victim ask it, like, what, 5 points that you're supposed to ask yourself as a victim to make sure that you have no blame in this before you're even allowed to think that maybe you were a victim. Right. That's dangerous.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's essentially burying the lead. Right. So you separated when you were 20 years old, right? Your family was essentially forced to separate.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it took you about 10 years to really find I guess your own thought process through all of this, right?
To even begin the journey,
Mm,
like it
wow.
was like, okay, here we are kind of at ground zero. Like I went out, I've explored what they would call the world, the land of Moab, all those things. I've done all that exploring for my 10 years. I'll take you back to some old phrases there.
Yeah.
I've
Land
done
of
this
Moab.
exploring.
Woo. It's triggering a little bit. Yeah.
There ain't no bread in Moab.
Oh.
um I've done all of that. How do I rebuild?
Mm,
Where do I go from here? And so that took another decade to really figure out for myself, like, where do I want my life to be? How do I want to raise my kids? How do I want my family to look in 20 years? What does my marriage look like? I had
mm.
to completely rethink everything I had ever been taught about men, because I learned that most of it wasn't true.
Yeah, they're not
And my poor
infallible. It's
husband,
crazy, right?
yeah, my poor husband is just like, what? Like, what do you think about me? And I'm like, that's all I've ever been taught, is that it could be any man at any moment. So that's why we have to give grace to each other,
Mm,
because it could be me tomorrow.
yeah.
Like, no, it could not be. If it doesn't have to be you.
Right. Right. And that was one of the things I was going to ask you, because you have raised your own family. You've got 5 kids. You've got a husband. And from what it looks like to me, y'all have a great life. What was dating like for you? Because growing up with some of these ideologies, it can really influence how you go and pick a partner, essentially.
Oh, absolutely. So my first serious relationship, I was 17, he was 23, which at the time I thought nothing about it, because he was going to be in the ministry, and
Whoa.
he had graduated from Bible college and I was in Bible college, and I didn't think anything about the age difference back then. And he had grown up in similar. So he had gone to another college there in Oklahoma City, and he had been affected by the same ideologies, the same issues. And honestly, it was catastrophic to our relationship. Like,
Mm,
if you take away any other issue that we had, that issue alone, that we were both dealing with these things that we had come up with, it was a disaster, recipe
mm.
for disaster. But then fast forward to meeting my husband, and he has just been the most patient and loving and kind person, and just been there through the thick of it. My whole family, all the drama, all the trauma, all the issues.
Yeah.
He has just been a steadfast force and helped me. Honestly, been one of the biggest single factors in helping me move past it and build a life I love.
Now, did your husband, did he come from a similar background as well? Did y'all go through the
Oh
courtship
no.
stuff, or no?
Oh no.
No.
Oh no.
Okay.
So
Wow.
so let me back up a little bit here, because I realize you're missing a piece of the story. So when my delve into Moab, I ended up pregnant. Imagine that, because
Oh,
that's what
wow.
is definitely going to happen. I think I was 23 at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and so got married and miscarried, but now I'm married. And you don't get a divorce like that. You
No.
do not get
Mm-mm.
a divorce like
Doesn't
that.
matter what
Was the
happens.
Oh no, that was the
Yeah.
cardinal. Like, no one in my family. I had one aunt that had been divorced one time, and then
Yeah.
she's been remarried like 30 years now. But you don't get a divorce.
No, you just need to submit more.
Yes.
Yeah. Before you even
he
think about the
wasn't.
D word. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. He wasn't. He wasn't religious at all, so he had no idea that aspect of what I was going through. But he, like, you just stay married,
Yeah.
and it escalated to a point where even my dad, my super fundamental religious dad, said, you need to divorce him. He is going to ruin your life.
Mm.
So at this point, I had 2 little girls, and according to everything I'd ever been taught, I was damaged goods.
Mm.
I was like,
Mm.
I will be single the rest of my life. There is no man on earth that would look twice at me. I've got this baggage on me, and I was ruined goods. That's all I'd ever been taught.
Right.
And here comes my husband,
Mm.
trying patient Daniel, never married, had no kids, and didn't even think twice. Jumped into it, and now it's been 14 years. We've had 3 more children together, and it's just crazy how much one person can make a difference in helping you unlearn all the stuff that's been shoved in your head.
Yeah. And it's crazy how, not coming from that religious extremist background, he can still be a good person. Isn't that wild? And
He went to
nothing
public school.
oh no, absolutely not. There's
He
no
was
way he could
he grew
possibly
up
be
Church
a,
of Christ.
oh, that's the church I grew up in.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh, where
So
I was?
he had the music without instruments.
Yes, yes.
Right.
But
Yeah.
where I was, if you were anything but independent, fundamental Bible Baptist church,
Uh-huh.
you weren't saved.
And in the Church of Christ, absolutely not. I mean, they're
That's how I grew
basically
up. I was
sworn
like,
enemies. Yeah.
oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Church of Christ, Pentecostal. My brother dated a girl in high school that went to a Bible church, and I thought my parents were going to have a connection, but of course they did court. So I think with my parents, they tried really hard. Yeah, they had the 5 kids. The first child, they tried really hard. They courted. I went on all their dates with them. They weren't allowed to be alone. They weren't allowed to hold hands. They weren't allowed to kiss. All those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came along and it got little. I pushed the boundaries a little bit.
Sure.
And then everything happened with the church. And then my younger 3 brothers, I think they'd just kind of given up by then.
This isn't working.
This is not
whatever you
working.
want. Yeah, yeah.
What they promised us is not happening here because our kids are not what we thought they were going to be.
Mm-hmm. Our life is not what we thought it was going to be, right? I think that's the shock for so many people coming out of this cult. So now you've got your own 5 kids.
Yes.
And you told me that you actually homeschool them.
I do. And it's so interesting because when I tell people my history and my background and they find out I homeschool, they don't understand that. Like, well, that's, and even some of the people I've seen talk about the Shiny Happy People documentary. Oh, this is an attack on Christianity. This is an attack on homeschooling. This is an attack on, wives being at home and being with their families. Like, this is an attack. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I take care of my kids. I love taking care of my husband and cooking and cleaning. Like, I love those things. I thrive in that role. And we homeschool our kids for no single bit of a religious reason.
Right.
We have the flexibility to travel. My husband, we're both self-employed. We can jump in a car right now and take off anywhere we want.
Yep.
And we've always wanted that. We wanted our kids with us so we could just enjoy time and travel and teach them things that they're not going to learn in a classroom. So it has nothing to do with religious reasons whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, that the Shiny Happy People documentary is not an attack on, like you said, Christianity or homeschooling. It's an attack on extremist ideologies, right?
Yes.
It's an attack on predatory behavior and abuse that is rampant within fundamental Christianity, of course. But there's nothing inherently wrong with going to church or homeschooling your kids. In fact, I've said that I'm still incredibly grateful for my homeschool education, because my parents, for the most part, I think did it for a lot of the right reasons. They wanted me to have a better education. They wanted to have that flexibility, right? And when I graduated from homeschool high school, and had my little piano recital as a party, isn't that
Did you
cute?
play Amazing Grace?
No, thank God. Thank God. Should have. That's probably why I turned out so messed up, right? No, but I had a phenomenal education. Academically speaking, I was leaps and bounds ahead. And I think when you do it for the right reasons, homeschooling can be a phenomenal solution. How do your kids operate in that environment? Do they?
My kids love it. They
that?
love my oldest one just graduated. She's heading off to college in the fall. Like, she's had a great experience. There were points in her life where she thought, like, maybe I want to go to school. Maybe I want to experience that. And now that she's done, she's like, I'm so glad I didn't do that. She's like, I would not want to have to deal with everything and, just the freedom and the flexibility. Honestly, she's dreading going to college. She's like, I'm going to have to be like on a schedule for the first time in my life. And this is
I don't get to do my own thing.
I know.
That's so cool to me to hear that, because just like you said, a lot of the feedback that I've gotten is, are you bashing homeschooling? And the answer is no, absolutely not.
And we have an amazing homeschool community in our area, which when my older girls were younger, it wasn't as prevalent, but now there are so many great co-ops and groups that we're parts of. And I would say 80% of them are not for religious reasons. 80% of them are truly just the freedom, flexibility, and the education that they can give them. And honestly, parts of our schools are a mess. Like, it just is true. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely agree with that. I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be for religious reasons. It could be something like, oh, well, I just want my kids to have more access to the tools and resources that they specifically need.
Yes.
I know a lot of folks with kids that have maybe special learning circumstances that will homeschool, and it's an incredible experience for them. So yeah, I think homeschooling is still a very valid educational path.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is accountability. I think when you get people off the way and they're able to just, kind of get into their own world and they're homeschooling for nefarious reasons, They're
Right.
homeschooling so they can have that control. And maybe they're not even doing school. Like I know growing up in our church, we did have some people that would homeschool and they just kept their kids at home all day and didn't even do anything. So yeah,
Yeah.
anything can be turned bad. Anything can be used for evil, but it
That's right.
doesn't mean as a standard, as a whole, it is a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely agree with you there. I think that this is such an important message for people to hear that, in spite of how you were brought up, the belief systems that you knew for so long, you've still managed to get to a point where you can leave that behind and have a beautiful, happy, successful life afterwards.
In spite of it all, yes.
Mm,
And it's not been easy. It's not just been like, oh, I just flipped the switch and everything was good. It took a lot of self work and counseling and just time and love from my husband and consistency to really be able to overcome those things. And not only like in and of myself, but to be able to see that other people in my life still struggling
mm.
and have enough grace and love to be able to try to work through it with them.
Well, I really appreciate you, kind of sharing a little bit about your story, Noel. Thank you so much. This has been incredible to hear, and I know that this is really going to resonate with a lot of folks who are still struggling with some of these mentalities that they're stuck in. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I truly hope that being vocal in my story and sharing, as hard as it is and as awkward as it sometimes is to talk about, if I can help one person, work through it, I'm happy to do it.
Thank you so much. And where would you like people to follow you or hear more about your journey?
Yeah. We're Jet Set Farmhouse on all platforms. And I did write a book that it isn't completely about this topic, but it does delve into it, called From the Ground Up. And you can read more about my childhood and my story there as well.
Well, thank you again, Noel. I really appreciate this.